If you've been following my channel for any length of time, you probably know that I love infrared photography. Photos with bright foliage and dark skies really stand out from traditional color images. And as a bonus, since infrared looks really good in hard sunlight, it helps extend long photo days. You can shoot color first thing in the morning and last thing at night, and then switch to infrared and get great imagery all day long. When I take photo trips, I really want to maximize the time that I spend on site, and having an infrared camera in my bag really helps me be versatile. I've been considering having another camera modified to see infrared light, and I wanted to test my Micro Four Thirds lenses against my infrared body that I have for that mount and see how they performed. Most of the infrared work that I've done to this point has been black and white. Every once in a while I play with color channel swapping and false color imagery, but at 720 nanometers conversion, which is the frequency for both of my cameras, there isn't a lot of color data to play with. The next camera I convert will probably be a full spectrum camera, so I can have a little more variability in what the images look like. Modified Micro Four Thirds cameras have a unique problem. Most modern lenses aren't designed for infrared, and they can hotspot in the middle of the image. There are a ton of vintage lens options that adapt really well to any mirrorless body. Unfortunately, the 2x crop factor that we get for Micro Four Thirds doesn't give us a lot of wide-angle options. Another challenge there is one of the great benefits of Micro Four Thirds is that we can get really small bodies and it makes them very portable. If we adapt full-frame glass, that takes away a lot of the advantage. It can be kind of awkward hanging a really big lens that was designed for a full-frame camera off the front of a relatively small Micro Four Thirds body. So I decided to take 7 of my native Micro Four Thirds lenses out and see how they performed. Quick bit of disclosure, a couple of these lenses I purchased, it's been about 6 years since I left the camera industry, but I did get a discount on a couple of these lenses. I'd like to think that I would have bought them anyway. I do miss that discount, but in the spirit of disclosure, I did get a couple of these at a bit of a discount. At this point, most of these lenses are available at a far lower price on the used market than the discount that I got them for when I worked in the industry. First, let's look at one of the more versatile lenses, at least in color, on my list. The Olympus 12-40 f2.8 Pro. This is Olympus's Pro normal zoom lens, sitting between the 7-14mm f2.8 Pro and the 40-150 f2.8 Pro lenses in their trinity of fast zooms. Mine is the original version. Being a modern Pro lens, I'd expected this to do poorly in infrared. Highly corrected modern lenses tend to be some of the worst performers on average for this kind of photography. To my surprise, while not perfect, it also wasn't too bad. In this example, shot at 12mm and an f8 aperture, which is stopped down a little farther than I generally shoot Micro Four Thirds, there is a color hotspot, but the same image in black and white looks usable to me. This photo at 40mm shot wide open looks great in both photos. And the third image does have a color hotspot at f6.3, but it looks fine in monochrome. Overall, I think this lens is usable in black and white, and if you can live with a color hotspot, which is far from the worst I've seen, the color images are still pretty sharp. A quick note on copy-to-copy performance. When I was working in a camera store, I got to try all sorts of lenses against my converted camera. And often, I found that lenses that were supposed to work very well in infrared according to online sources, when I mounted it to my camera, they didn't do very well. Some of them had extremely pronounced hotspots. The second lens I took for a test was the Olympus 14-42 3.5-5.6 Mark II-R. Quite a name. Being a kit lens with a fairly simple optical design, I had high hopes for this lens, and it's also been mentioned on a lot of lists and by a lot of shooters as being one that performs pretty well in infrared. Being a kit lens with more basic optical design, and being widely mentioned as a good performer, I was optimistic about how it would work. This is a small, versatile lens, and while not the sharpest lens I own, it's not terrible either. In these 3 test shots, all shot at f6.3, I didn't see any hotspots in color or in black and white. I shot these all at f6.3 because stepping down further creates some really noticeable diffraction in my experience. And with the full frame equivalent of f12.6, it's deep enough for most of what I would photograph anyway. Hotspots tend to occur at smaller aperture sizes, so f6.3 is a good stress test. If it performs well at that setting, it should work fine opened up further. This first shot is at 14mm and looks good in both edits. The second shot at 26mm also looks good in both false color and black and white. And at the telephoto end, the 42mm example has a little vignetting, but other than that, both images look good. When I say hotspots, that's usually a round area in the center of the image that is lighter than the rest of the exposure, or has a color shift in that part of the image. I've seen lenses where it was dramatic with hard edges making images unusable without some serious work in editing. None of the lenses I tested for this video were that dramatic. Often, when I mention a color hotspot, it's only visible as a subtle color shift in the sky near the center of an image. There's a few lenses here that I mentioned have a slight color shift. A couple of those I completely missed on my first run through of the images. When I went back and took a more detailed view, I did see them. Everyone has a different idea of what is and isn't acceptable. I've seen images posted where people say the lenses don't have a hotspot, and I can definitely see one present. So that's why I've taken so many shots here. I want you to be able to make up your own mind on whether the lens might work for you or not. Okay, enough chatting, back to the lenses. The next lens was the biggest surprise in my testing. The 14-150 f3.5 to 5.6 Mark II from Olympus is a super zoom lens that I didn't expect to work very well. It's very modern, there's a lot of glass in it. I was really surprised at how good this lens ended up being. The lens covers everything from a full frame wide angle equivalent of 28 millimeters to a full frame equivalent of 300 meters on the long end, making it a really versatile lens. I assumed this lens was going to be a mess in infrared. To my surprise, it did really well in the tests. At 14 millimeters and f6.3, there appears to be an extremely faint color hotspot, but not bad enough to be an issue most of the time in my opinion. In black and white, it looks great. In this next shot at 67 millimeters and f5.6, it looks good in both photos, and the same is true at 150 millimeters and f5.6. Super zooms are generally a compromise. While they're super versatile, they tend not to be as sharp or as bright in their aperture as more dedicated smaller zoom range lenses, and certainly not primes. If you can live with that compromise, this is a great lens and it performed very well. Next, I took out what is probably my favorite lens for Micro Four Thirds, the 17mm f1.8 from Olympus, and this is the original one, not the newer OM version that adds weather sealing. This lens sits on the border between wide and normal lenses. It's a really useful focal length for everything from environmental portraiture, street photography, and I just like it for a walking around lens. I find this focal length is really easy for me to visualize. I'm never surprised when I put a camera up to my eye. It's just a fun lens to use for my normal color imagery, and I was hoping that it did well in infrared. My memory told me that I had had mixed experiences with this lens on my infrared converted body. In this first example, shot at f5.6, there are no issues I can see in either color or black and white. The second image, slightly stopped down to f6.3, shows just a hint of color hot spotting near the top of the trees. The monochrome edit looks fine, so at moderate apertures this lens appears to work pretty well. The Olympus 60mm macro makes a lot of lists of good infrared lenses. At a full frame 120mm equivalent, it's not only a good macro lens, but also a solid lens for portraiture. I've not had a good experience using it for false color imagery though. In the selfie, there's a large hot spot in the middle of the image, and that's wide open at 2.8. Like a lot of the lenses, it's fine at that aperture in black and white. In my opinion, if it has a hot spot wide open, it's not a good lens for doing false color imagery. Next, we have an inexpensive telephoto zoom, the Olympus 40-150 f4 to 5.6. This is a kit lens, often bundled with lower-end cameras. It's small, light, and reasonably sharp considering its price tag. It's sharp enough that I've made 16x20 prints off of this that look really good. I've done a couple 20x30s that, as long as you're not standing too close, still look solid. But it's not something that I would use for really pushing the limits of a Micro Four Thirds sensor. This first shot, at 49mm and f6.3, might have the tiniest bit of a color hotspot above the trees right of center, and otherwise looks fine. The second shot at 150mm and f5.6 looks good in both photos. Finally, I took my Panasonic 14mm f2.5 out for a test. This lens likes to flare, but other than that, it works pretty well. Here's a shot at f6.3. It has a very minor hotspot in color that disappears in black and white. At f5.6, the color hotspot is even more faint, and certainly usable for my work. Again, it looks great in the desaturated edit. At the end of these tests, I'm not sure whether Micro Four Thirds is going to be the mount that I choose for my next converted camera. I've not had great luck with any of the ultra-wides, even ones that have been mentioned online as being good performers, and that's something that I want to have in my kit, so I'm going to continue to look, but right now I'm undecided. I may do a second round of tests for Micro Four Thirds, and I'll do tests for my Canon mirrorless as well if there's interest. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments section, and if you've had experience with a Micro Four Thirds camera that's been converted and have some good lens options, please let us know. I hope you found this useful. Good luck in your art journey, and we'll see you next time.